No one on Earth saw the war coming, not because humans were careless, but because the universe had always been quiet, too quiet, and for generations the stars were just lights in the sky, symbols of hope, mystery, and future dreams, not weapons. Not eyes watching, not threats waiting. Earth was divided, as it always was, by borders, politics, and pride. Yet on that day, none of it mattered. Because the sky itself changed, and when the first shadow moved across the sun, millions of people looked up at the same time, confused, curious, unaware that history had just ended and something darker had begun. Satellites stopped responding within seconds, not exploding, not falling, simply going silent as if something had gently switched them off, and then the clouds burned away in perfect circles, revealing shapes that were not natural, not human, not friendly. They were vast, smooth, and cold, floating without sound, without warning, without emotion. And every human defense system hesitated for one fatal moment, because there was no protocol for gods descending from the sky. The first strike did not hit a military base or a capital city. It hit the ocean, and the sea itself rose like a wall, water boiling, ships crushed like toys, waves racing toward, coastlines faster than warning systems could react. And by the time alarms began to scream, it was already too late. Across the world, communication networks collapsed. Power grids failed, and cities went dark as if night had swallowed the planet in broad daylight. The beings who came did not speak at first. They did not threaten. They did not explain. They simply acted, and their actions were precise, efficient, and terrifyingly calm. Energy beams cut through buildings without explosions, without fire, leaving clean lines of destruction, as if entire city blocks were erased by an invisible blade. And people ran, not knowing where to go, because the ground was no safer than the sky. Governments tried to respond, missiles launched, jets scrambled, commands shouted into dead radios, but every human weapon failed before it could even reach its target. Guided systems losing lock, engines shutting down, pilots reporting systems overridden by something they could not see, and then silence followed, broken only by falling debris and distant screams. In less than 1 hour, Earth's greatest military powers were reduced to confusion and fear, and that was when the message finally came. It appeared on every remaining screen, every working device, projected directly into human systems in a language instantly understood, not learned, not translated, but placed into the mind itself. The voice was not loud, not angry, not proud. It was calm, almost bored, as if speaking to animals that could not truly understand their place. The voice said that Earth had been identified, evaluated, and selected, that humanity was a young species with useful traits, strong bodies, adaptable minds, emotional depth, and high endurance, and that these traits made humans suitable for her. Refinement. The word sounded harmless, almost kind, but the images that followed were not. Humans saw other worlds, broken cities, empty skies, beings like themselves, standing in lines, eyes blank, movements slow, no fire left in them. And the voice explained that refinement was necessary for order, that free species cause chaos, that the galaxy functioned best when guided, shaped, and controlled. Earth, the voice said, had resisted integration for too long simply because it did not know it was being watched. Resistance, the voice added, would only increase loss. Then, The sky burned again, not in random destruction, but in focused cleansing. Major cities were hit next, not destroyed fully, but crippled, their centers erased, their populations scattered, and fear spread faster than any fire. Hospitals collapsed, shelters failed, and everywhere humans realized the same truth at the same time. This enemy did not want Earth destroyed, it wanted Earth broken. Soldiers fought anyway, not because they believed they could win, but because humans had always fought when cornered, and small victories appeared in unexpected places. A fighter jet that got too close and fired blindly, a missile that detonated. Near a smaller craft, a ground team that managed to bring down a drone using old weapons and raw courage. And for a moment, hope sparked, brief and fragile. That hope died when the response came, not as anger, but as correction. Entire regions lost gravity, people lifted helplessly into the air, vehicles floated, buildings cracked under forces they were never meant to face, and then gravity returned. All at once, and the ground itself became a weapon. The message returned, colder now, stating that human aggression confirmed the need for refinement, and that extraction would begin. That was when the true horror started, because the aliens did not just kill, they took. Massive transport vessels descended, opening like wounds in the sky, pulling people upward in silent beams, families torn apart in seconds, children screaming without sound as they vanished into the light, soldiers firing until their weapons were ripped from their hands, and scientists dragged away from bunkers they thought were hidden. Humans learned that day that screaming into the sky meant nothing to something that did not see you as equal. Across the planet, pockets of resistance continued to fight, not coordinated, not strategic, but human, driven by anger, fear, and love. And in some places they've succeeded in slowing the extraction, destroying smaller craft, collapsing tunnels, hiding in ruins. But for every small success, there were thousands of losses, and the planet bled silently into space. Underground shelters became tombs, surface cities became hunting grounds, and the sky never stopped watching. After 3 days, Earth was unrecognizable, not destroyed, but stripped, its population reduced, its spirit wounded, its future uncertain. The aliens announced that the first phase was complete, that Earth had been pacified, that refinement would continue off-world, and that remaining humans would be monitored. Then, just as suddenly as they came, the fleets rose back into the stars, leaving behind silence heavier than any explosion. Smoke covered the ruins, fires burned without anyone to stop them, and survivors emerged slowly, looking at a sky that felt empty but still hostile. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no leaders left to speak for the planet. Only small groups of humans helping each other from rubble, sharing water, tending wounds, and asking the same question without words. Why were we spared? Deep beneath collapsed cities, in bunkers that had lost contact with the world, people listened to static and held on to hope, because humans always did. And among them were soldiers who had memorized enemy patterns, engineers who had seen alien machines up close, scientists who had hidden data in their minds, and ordinary people who had lost everything except their will to live. The aliens believed Earth was finished, classified as compliant, its resistance broken, its people ready for refinement, but they had misunderstood something fundamental, something no scan or observation could measure. Humans did not need to win to resist, They only needed to survive, to remember, and to wait. In the quiet after the massacre, as the planet mourned in silence, something new began to form. Not an army, not a government, but a shared understanding that the war was not over. That Earth had not been defeated, only tested, and that one day, somewhere in the dark between stars, humanity would answer the unexpected war in its own way. No one on Earth saw the war coming, not because humans were careless, but because the universe had always been quiet, too quiet, and for generations the stars were just lights in the sky, symbols of hope, mystery, and future dreams, not weapons. Not eyes watching, not threats waiting. Earth was divided, as it always was, by borders, politics, and pride. Yet on that day, none of it mattered. Because the sky itself changed, and when the first shadow moved across the sun, millions of people looked up at the same time, confused, curious, unaware that history had just ended and something darker had begun. Satellites stopped responding within seconds, not exploding, not falling, simply going silent as if something had gently switched them off, and then the clouds burned away in perfect circles, revealing shapes that were not natural, not human, not friendly. They were vast, smooth, and cold, floating without sound, without warning, without emotion. And every human defense system hesitated for one fatal moment, because there was no protocol for gods descending from the sky. The first strike did not hit a military base or a capital city. It hit the ocean, and the sea itself rose like a wall, water boiling, ships crushed like toys, waves racing toward, coastlines faster than warning systems could react. And by the time alarms began to scream, it was already too late. Across the world, communication networks collapsed. Power grids failed, and cities went dark as if night had swallowed the planet in broad daylight. The beings who came did not speak at first. They did not threaten. They did not explain. They simply acted, and their actions were precise, efficient, and terrifyingly calm. Energy beams cut through buildings without explosions, without fire, leaving clean lines of destruction, as if entire city blocks were erased by an invisible blade. And people ran, not knowing where to go, because the ground was no safer than the sky. Governments tried to respond, missiles launched, jets scrambled, commands shouted into dead radios, but every human weapon failed before it could even reach its target. Guided systems losing lock, engines shutting down, pilots reporting systems overridden by something they could not see, and then silence followed, broken only by falling debris and distant screams. In less than 1 hour, Earth's greatest military powers were reduced to confusion and fear, and that was when the message finally came. It appeared on every remaining screen, every working device, projected directly into human systems in a language instantly understood, not learned, not translated, but placed into the mind itself. The voice was not loud, not angry, not proud. It was calm, almost bored, as if speaking to animals that could not truly understand their place. The voice said that Earth had been identified, evaluated, and selected, that humanity was a young species with useful traits, strong bodies, adaptable minds, emotional depth, and high endurance, and that these traits made humans suitable for her. Refinement. The word sounded harmless, almost kind, but the images that followed were not. Humans saw other worlds, broken cities, empty skies, beings like themselves, standing in lines, eyes blank, movements slow, no fire left in them. And the voice explained that refinement was necessary for order, that free species cause chaos, that the galaxy functioned best when guided, shaped, and controlled. Earth, the voice said, had resisted integration for too long simply because it did not know it was being watched. Resistance, the voice added, would only increase loss. Then, the sky burned again, not in random destruction, but in focused cleansing. Major cities were hit next, not destroyed fully, but crippled, their centers erased, their populations scattered, and fear spread faster than any fire. Hospitals collapsed, shelters failed, and everywhere humans realized the same truth at the same time. This enemy did not want Earth destroyed, it wanted Earth broken. Soldiers fought anyway, not because they believed they could win, but because humans had always fought when cornered, and small victories appeared in unexpected places. A fighter jet that got too close and fired blindly, a missile that detonated. Near a smaller craft, a ground team that managed to bring down a drone using old weapons and raw courage. And for a moment, hope sparked, brief and fragile. That hope died when the response came, not as anger, but as correction. Entire regions lost gravity, people lifted helplessly into the air, vehicles floated, buildings cracked under forces they were never meant to face, and then gravity returned. All at once, and the ground itself became a weapon. The message returned, colder now, stating that human aggression confirmed the need for refinement, and that extraction would begin. That was when the true horror started, because the aliens did not just kill, they took. Massive transport vessels descended, opening like wounds in the sky, pulling people upward in silent beams, families torn apart in seconds, children screaming without sound as they vanished into the light, soldiers firing until their weapons were ripped from their hands, and scientists dragged away from bunkers they thought were hidden. Humans learned that day that screaming into the sky meant nothing to something that did not see you as equal. Across the planet, pockets of resistance continued to fight, not coordinated, not strategic, but human, driven by anger, fear, and love. And in some places they've succeeded in slowing the extraction, destroying smaller craft, collapsing tunnels, hiding in ruins. But for every small success, there were thousands of losses, and the planet bled silently into space. Underground shelters became tombs, surface cities became hunting grounds, and the sky never stopped watching. After 3 days, Earth was unrecognizable, not destroyed, but stripped, its population reduced, its spirit wounded, its future uncertain. The aliens announced that the first phase was complete, that Earth had been pacified, that refinement would continue off-world, and that remaining humans would be monitored. Then, just as suddenly as they came, the fleets rose back into the stars, leaving behind silence heavier than any explosion. Smoke covered the ruins, fires burned without anyone to stop them, and survivors emerged slowly, looking at a sky that felt empty but still hostile. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no leaders left to speak for the planet. Only small groups of humans helping each other from rubble, sharing water, tending wounds, and asking the same question without words. Why were we spared? Deep beneath collapsed cities, in bunkers that had lost contact with the world, people listened to static and held on to hope because humans always did. and among them were soldiers who had memorized enemy patterns, engineers who had seen alien machines up close, scientists who had hidden data in their minds, and ordinary people who had lost everything except their will to live. The aliens believed Earth was finished, classified as compliant, its resistance broken, its people ready for refinement, but they had misunderstood something fundamental, something no scan or observation could measure. Humans did not need to win to resist, they only needed to survive, to remember, and to wait. In the quiet after the massacre, as the planet mourned in silence, something new began to form. Not an army, not a government, but a shared understanding that the war was not over. That Earth had not been defeated, only tested, and that one day, somewhere in the dark between stars, humanity would answer the unexpected war in its own way. The truth did not arrive like a storm or an explosion. It arrived slowly, quietly, hidden inside broken machines and damaged memories. And when humans finally understood it, the weight of it pressed harder than fear ever had. For months after the invasion, survivors focused on learning how to stay alive, how to hide, how to rebuild with scraps. But beneath all of that effort was a question no one said out loud. What happened to the people who were taken? The aliens had called it refinement, a clean word, a gentle word, but nothing gentle left scars like these. The first real answers came from a place no one expected. A damaged alien containment unit buried deep under a collapsed transport site, half fused into rock by heat and pressure, forgotten by the invaders when they left. It was discovered by accident when a scavenger team searched for metals and power cells, and when they forced it open, expecting weapons or fuel, they found recordings. The recordings were not meant for humans, they were internal logs, cold, detailed, and precise, and although the language was alien, the meaning came through clearly as humans decoded patterns and symbols over time. These logs described species the way humans once described livestock, listing traits, weaknesses, productivity values, compliance ratings, and refinement success percentages. And when Earth's data appeared among them, it was incomplete, marked as interrupted but promising. Humans were labeled resilient, aggressive, emotionally volatile, and highly adaptable. Traits considered dangerous in free form, but valuable when controlled. The word refinement appeared again and again, and as humans pieced together its meaning, the lie shattered. Refinement was not improvement, it was reduction. It removed curiosity because curiosity caused rebellion. It dampened emotional range because strong emotion led to resistance. It limited physical independence because independent bodies required more force to control. Refined species were not partners in a galactic order. They were tools, labor forces, soldiers without will, populations that obeyed without question and died without protest. The survivors who studied the logs felt a sickness grow inside them. Because this was not just conquest, it was erasure, and Earth had almost joined a graveyard of living bodies with empty minds. More evidence came from the few humans who had escaped extraction, not heroes. Just unlucky survivors who had fallen from transport beams or been dropped when systems failed. And when they were strong enough to speak, they described rooms filled with light that hurt to look at, machines that touched the skin without pain but left the mind foggy, voices that never shouted but never stopped, repeating instructions, patterns, obedience drills, and when the survivors tried to remember faces, names, or loved ones, Those memories felt distant, slipping away like sand. Doctors listened, scientists recorded every word, and the pattern became clear. The process started gently, slowly disconnecting identity from memory, turning people into something useful and calm. The aliens did not need chains because they removed the part of the mind that wanted to break them. Across Earth, this knowledge spread carefully, passed from group to group through trusted messengers, never broadcast, never centralized, because humans knew that information was power, and power attracted attention. When parents learned what refinement meant, grief turned into something darker, because death was final, but refinement was a slow theft. And many realized their children might still be alive somewhere in the stars, breathing, working, obeying, without knowing who they once were. That thought hardened the survivors in a way no weapon could. In one underground research hub, built inside the remains of a subway system, a group of scientists focused entirely on alien neural technology recovered from drones and probes, trying to understand how refinement affected the brain, and what they found shocked even them. The alien systems did not destroy neural pathways, they rewrote priorities, suppressing certain connections while strengthening others, meaning refinement could, in theory, be reversed, but only if intervention happened early enough. This discovery created conflict among the survivors because hope was dangerous. If refinement could be reversed, then those taken might be saved. But attempting rescue would expose Earth long before it was ready, and failure would mean losing everything. The council debated in silence for days, weighing survival against responsibility, and while no decision was made, one thing became clear. Humans would never accept a future where their species existed as refined shadows. At the same time, monitoring teams noticed changes in alien observation patterns, subtle shifts in sensor sweeps and data collection, suggesting that Earth was being re-evaluated. The aliens had not returned physically, but their attention was sharpening, and humans understood why. Earth was supposed to collapse into compliance, yet it was stabilizing, rebuilding in ways that did not fit the expected models, and the invaders were curious. To counter this, humans fed the Watchers exactly what they wanted to see: fake signs of extinction, decaying energy outputs, false radiation spikes, abandoned settlements, and staged conflicts between survivor groups, crafting the image of a species eating itself after defeat. Behind that illusion, learning accelerated. Engineers integrated alien components into human systems, not to copy them, but to understand their limits, discovering that alien technology relied heavily on centralized control signals, making it powerful but predictable. Humans preferred messy systems, decentralized, redundant, capable of failure without collapse, and this difference became a quiet advantage. Children grew up learning not only reading in numbers, but survival logic, critical thinking, and the history of the invasion, taught honestly, without comfort, because lies had nearly ended them once. These children did not dream of alien friends or peaceful stars. They dreamed of strength, of knowledge, of making sure Earth was never helpless. Again, in the ruins of an old data center, a former analyst uncovered something buried deep in alien archives. References to a past failure, a species that resisted refinement long enough to damage an alien control hub, forcing the invaders to destroy the system and erase all records of that species afterward. There were no names, no images, only warnings, and this fragment changed how humans saw their enemy. The aliens were not invincible. They were careful, afraid of disruption, and obsessed with control because control was the foundation of their empire. That meant chaos. The very thing they feared was a weapon. Slowly, a new philosophy formed. Among the survivors, they would not fight the aliens head-on like a traditional war, because that was expected, predictable, and easily crushed. They would fight by being human, by being adaptable, emotional, creative, and unpredictable. The very traits refinement was designed to erase. In quiet moments, survivors looked at the stars differently now, not as distant mysteries, but as places where stolen lives waited, and this gave their struggle direction. The truth about refinement did not make humans reckless. It made them patient, because they understood that survival alone was not victory. Memory was. As long as humans remembered who they were, as long as they taught their children the cost of silence and obedience, refinement could never fully succeed. The aliens believed they had interrupted Earth's story and placed it on a path toward compliance. But what they had actually done was force humanity to confront the universe without illusions. In underground halls filled with mismatched technology and quiet determination, humans planned not revenge, not conquest, but resistance so deep and lasting that no empire built on control could ignore it. The truth they stole from other species had failed to break humanity, and instead it became the reason Earth would never bow, because a species that understands what it stands to lose fights not for survival, but for meaning, and meaning was something refinement could never fully erase. Waiting had kept humanity alive, but waiting alone was not enough anymore, because patience without direction slowly turned into fear. And fear was exactly what the aliens expected to grow inside the remaining humans until resistance faded into acceptance. For a long time, Earth stayed quiet on purpose, hiding its pulse beneath ruins and rock, letting the galaxy believe the planet was nothing more than a scar left behind by a successful refinement campaign. But beneath that silence, something dangerous was forming, not loud, not proud, but focused. The first sign that Earth had changed came from a decision that felt small at the time, almost insignificant compared to the scale of the invasion. A decision to stop reacting and start acting. In one of the deepest shelters, far below the remains of a shattered Magazi, a group of engineers and former soldiers gathered around a table made from scrap metal and old maps. And for the first time since the war began, they were not discussing survival routes or hiding strategies. They were discussing intent. The question was simple but heavy. How do you fight something that believes it already owns you? The answer did not come from anger or hero speeches. It came from understanding the enemy better than the enemy understood itself. Humans had spent months studying alien technology, not trying to copy it perfectly, but trying to see its blind spots, and the more they learned, the clearer it became that the alien empire was built on control through certainty. Their systems assumed predictable behavior, expected submission after overwhelming force, and relied on centralized coordination that left little room for error. Humans, on the other hand, were messy, emotional, decentralized by nature, and for the first time, that chaos felt like an advantage instead of a weakness. The plan that formed was not to strike Earth's invaders directly, but to test them, quietly, carefully, to see how they reacted when the expected pattern broke. The opportunity came sooner than expected, when long-range sensors picked up a small alien patrol fleet passing through a nearby star system, likely part of routine monitoring, not a combat force, confident that Earth was no longer a threat. The Council debated for days, knowing that even a small action could draw attention they were not ready for, but in the end, the decision was made. Not because they were confident, but because doing nothing meant accepting the future the aliens wanted. Preparation took weeks, and every step was slow and deliberate. Engineers modified, captured alien components into human-built vessels, not sleek or beautiful, but strong, layered, and unpredictable. Ships that did not rely on a single power source or command system, ships that could lose half their functions and still fight. Former pilots trained in simulators built from salvaged data and imagination, learning alien movement patterns, response times, and correction behaviors, memorizing them until reaction became instinct. No one spoke of victory, only of learning, because even failure would teach them something useful. When the human vessels finally left Earth, they did so without ceremony, slipping out of the system using unconventional trajectories designed to confuse long-range sensors, their hulls rough and patched, carrying crews who understood that they might never return. The encounter was brief, violent, and unlike anything the alien patrol expected. Human ships did not follow standard engagement patterns, did not prioritize targets logically, did not retreat when damaged, and instead moved in erratic bursts, attacking sensor arrays and communication nodes first, blinding and isolating alien vessels before striking again from unexpected angles. The aliens responded quickly, efficiently, but their corrections assumed a level of predictability that was not there. And within minutes, confusion spread through their formation. One alien ship was disabled, not destroyed, its systems overloaded. By feedback loops humans had designed specifically to exploit alien reliance on centralized control. When the human ships withdrew, they did not pursue destruction, they vanished, leaving behind wreckage and unanswered questions. Back on Earth, the return of the surviving vessels was met not with cheers, but with quiet relief, because the mission had achieved its true goal, confirmation. The aliens could be surprised. More importantly, they could be confused. Data recovered from the disabled alien ship revealed frantic internal communications, rapid reassessment protocols, and something unexpected: concern. The alien empire had not anticipated resistance evolving this quickly, and that realization spread through Earth's underground networks like fire. Humans did not celebrate, because celebration was dangerous, but something shifted in how they spoke, how they stood, how they looked at the stars. The idea of helplessness cracked. Over the following months, similar operations were carried out, never in the same way twice, sometimes targeting supply routes, sometimes observation platforms, sometimes simply feeding false data into alien systems before disappearing again. Humans became a rumor, a problem without a clear shape, and the galaxy began to notice. Alien command structures struggled to categorize Earth's behavior because it did not fit the refinement model. Instead of collapsing or submitting, Earth was behaving like a wound that refused to close, unpredictable and painful. Other species under alien control noticed the disruptions as well. Subtle changes in patrol patterns, delayed responses, unexplained losses, and though they did not yet understand the source, whispers began to spread, quiet at first, then persistent. Earth was still alive, On the planet itself, life continued to adapt to this new reality. Training became part of daily existence, not just physical combat, but mental resilience, problem-solving under pressure, and emotional control without suppression. Humans learned to use their feelings as fuel without letting them burn out of control, a balance that aliens had never mastered. Children who had grown up underground were taught not only what had been lost, but why it mattered, and they listened with a seriousness that came from understanding the cost of ignorance. The council expanded, not in size, but in reach. Connecting cells across continents through layered communication systems that changed constantly, ensuring no single failure could expose the whole network. Leadership was fluid, based on trust and competence rather than rank, and this flexibility allowed humans to respond faster than their enemy expected. The aliens began to increase monitoring of Earth, but every scan returned the same picture: a dying planet, minimal energy output, scattered survivors, nothing worth immediate attention, and this mismatch between data and reality frustrated them. Humans had learned how to lie to machines. In a quiet moment, deep inside a converted research vault, a scientist reviewed the accumulated data and realized something that changed the direction of the war. Earth did not need to defeat the alien empire to win. It only needed to break the system that allowed refinement to exist. Control was the empire's strength and its weakness, and if humans could disrupt that control on a large enough scale, refined species across the galaxy might begin to wake up. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to cause instability. This idea was dangerous because it shifted the goal from survival to responsibility. But humanity had already crossed that line the moment it learned the truth about refinement. Earth was no longer fighting only for itself. The operations grew bolder, still careful, still indirect, but increasingly confident, and with each success, humans refined something of their own, not technology, but identity. They were no longer just survivors hiding in the dark. They were actors shaping the conflict, and that realization carried weight. Losses still happened, ships still failed to return, people still died, and every name was remembered, because memory was resistance. But unlike before, these losses were chosen, not forced, and choice mattered. Somewhere in the alien command hierarchy, Earth was reclassified, no longer compliant, no longer irrelevant, but problematic, and that single word marked a turning point. Earth had stopped waiting for the universe to decide its fate and had begun writing its own, quietly, carefully, with scars still fresh and fear never fully gone, but with a clarity that had not existed before. The unexpected war had changed humanity, stripped away illusions, and forced it to confront what it truly valued. And now, as human ships slipped through the dark between stars and alien systems struggled to adapt, one truth became impossible to ignore. Earth was no longer asking to be left alone, and the galaxy would soon have to decide how to respond to a species that refused to stay broken. The galaxy did not change all at once. It never did. Empires preferred slow certainty over sudden truth, but small disruptions have a way of spreading when control depends on silence. And Earth had learned how to make silence speak. At first, the strange events were dismissed as errors, betrayal failures blamed on aging systems, lost ships written off as navigation faults or rare stellar interference, because admitting the alternative meant admitting that refinement had failed somewhere. and failure was unacceptable. The alien empire had built its authority on the belief that once a species was touched, it never recovered, that fear plus control always led to obedience, and for centuries that belief had been correct. Until Earth, as human operations continued, carefully spaced and deliberately inconsistent, the data became impossible to ignore. Supply routes went dark without battle debris, monitoring stations sent back perfect reports while secretly feeding corrupted data, and refined species began missing quotas in small but noticeable ways, working slower, hesitating longer, asking questions they had not asked in generations. These were tiny cracks, almost invisible, but to an empire built on precision, they felt like alarms ringing in the walls. Among the refined populations, something unfamiliar stirred. Not rebellion yet, but curiosity, because the control systems were designed to suppress extremes, not subtle shifts. And the idea that something was wrong spread in looks, pauses, and war. And mistakes rather than words. The empire responded by increasing oversight, tightening schedules, recalibrating refinement protocols. But these actions only made the pressure worse, because humans had designed their interference to create stress inside the system, not destroy it outright. On Earth, observers watched the results with mixed emotions, knowing that every disruption carried risk for the very species they hoped to free, but also understanding that doing nothing meant permanent erasure. The Council debated again, longer. This time, because the war had grown beyond Earth, and responsibility weighed heavier than survival ever had. Some argued that humanity should pull back, secure its own future first, because the Empire's attention was sharpening and retaliation was inevitable. But others pointed out that attention was already there, and retreat would only teach the enemy how to close the cracks. In the end, the decision was made not through votes or speeches, but through shared understanding. Humans had already been seen, and once seen, hiding was only useful if it served a purpose. The next phase was not about attacks or sabotage. It was about messages, not broadcast openly, but embedded inside systems refined species still used every day. Humans had learned how alien control networks delivered instruction and feedback, subtle pulses that guided behavior without conscious awareness, and by carefully altering those signals, they introduced variation, not commands, just moments of choice. A refined worker might pause for half a second longer before completing a task. A refined soldier might question an order that felt slightly inefficient. And over time these micro-delays added up, causing inefficiencies that could not be traced to a single source. To the Empire, it felt like the galaxy was developing friction. Whispers began among non-refined species as well, traders, scavengers, and fringe civilizations who lived near the edges of imperial space, noticing changes in patrol behavior and enforcement intensity, hearing rumors of a world that had survived contact, a world that had been marked for refinement and refused to disappear. These whispers did not speak of victory or war. They spoke of possibility, and possibility was dangerous. Earth became a myth before it became a symbol, described differently depending on who spoke of it: a cursed planet, a broken world, a nest of chaos, but always with the same detail: it did not obey. Humans never confirmed these stories, never denied them, understanding that myths grew stronger when left alone. On Earth, life continued in balance between preparation and restraint. because the council knew that the empire would eventually respond in force, and when it did, Earth needed to be ready not just to survive, but to endure prolonged detention. Training intensified, not in numbers, but in depth. Humans learned to think in systems, to anticipate reactions several steps ahead, to accept loss without losing direction. Children were taught that fear was natural, but obedience to fear was a choice, and this lesson shaped a generation that had never known peace but understood purpose. Meanwhile, the Empire convened its highest oversight structures, analyzing Earth's classification again and again, unable to reconcile the data. With established models, Earth was supposed to be collapsing into compliance, yet its signature remained inconsistent, sometimes quiet, sometimes active, never fully predictable. And the refined populations closest to its influence showed the highest deviation rates. The term problematic was replaced with dangerous, not because of military threat alone, but because Earth represented a failure of certainty, and certainty was the foundation of refinement. A decision was made to prepare a corrective action, not immediate invasion, but containment, isolation, and if necessary, total erasure, because the Empire believed that examples mattered. An Earth could not be allowed to inspire. As these plans formed, humans sensed the shift through changes in monitoring patterns and energy flows. The Watchers were no longer passive. They were focusing, narrowing their gaze. Instead of panic, Earth responded with patience, because patience was now a weapon. Operations slowed. Disruptions became rarer but more precise, designed to leave the Empire guessing whether Earth had retreated or simply changed strategy. At the same time, humans reached out carefully to other species, not with promises of salvation, but with proof of choice, subtle demonstrations that control could be resisted without immediate annihilation. Some species ignored these signs, too afraid to hope, but others listened, quietly adjusting their behavior, testing boundaries in small ways, and when punishment did not immediately follow, courage grew. The galaxy did not erupt into rebellion, but it leaned, just slightly, away from obedience, and that lean was enough to strain the Empire's systems. Earth watched all of this with clear eyes, knowing that it stood at the center of a slow-burning conflict far larger than itself, a conflict between control and choice, and that there would be no easy end. Losses increased as alien countermeasures improved. Human ships were trapped, cells were exposed, lives were lost, and each loss was felt deeply, because this was not a distant war fought by strangers. It was personal, shaped by memory and grief. Yet even in loss, something held, because humans no longer believed they were alone. Somewhere in the galaxy, refined beings hesitated, non-refined traders whispered, and alien commanders argued, and all of it traced back to a planet that was supposed to be silent. Earth had not announced its defiance with words or broadcasts. It had done something far more dangerous. It had changed behavior, and behavior changed systems. As the Empire prepared its response, and the galaxy watched with cautious interest, one truth became unavoidable. The war was no longer just about Earth. It was about whether the universe would remain a place where obedience was enforced, or whether choice, once awakened, could spread, and in that quiet tension, with stars watching and systems straining, humanity stood ready, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as proof that even after massacre and loss, a species could decide what it would become and refused to be refined. The Empire finally moved, not in anger, not in panic, but in calculation, because it had learned enough about humanity to know that fear no longer worked and silence no longer contained them. And that realization alone marked a failure greater than any lost ship or disrupted system. The decision to act was framed as correction, a necessary adjustment to preserve order, and fleets were assembled with precision. Not overwhelming in size, but absolute in intent, designed not to conquer Earth again, but to end the problem permanently. By removing its influence from the galaxy, on Earth, the signs were clear long before the fleets crossed into visible range. Monitoring patterns tightened, background signals sharpened, and the quiet pressure humans had learned to read settled. Over the planet, like a held breath. There was no panic, no evacuation orders, no dramatic speeches, because humanity had already accepted that this moment would come, and preparation had replaced hope as the foundation of survival. Deep underground, the Council gathered one last time, not to debate, but to align, because disagreement had been resolved over years of shared sacrifice, and now there was only action. The plan Earth had built was not to win a battle, because battles were temporary. It was to deliver an answer so clear that the Empire would be forced to respond on Earth's terms, not its own. Human ships did not gather in large formations or visible fleets. Instead, they moved independently, scattered across space in patterns that looked like chaos to alien sensors. Each vessel carrying fragments of a larger design no single crew fully understood. This was intentional, because humans had learned that centralized knowledge was fragile, and survival depended on trust rather than control. As the alien fleets entered the outer regions of the system, they encountered resistance that did not behave like resistance. No direct engagement, no attempts to block their path, only subtle interference, distorted sensor readings, false gravitational signatures, and navigation data that shifted just enough to cause hesitation. The aliens corrected quickly, but each correction forced them to slow, to communicate, to rely on the very systems humans had been quietly learning how to touch. When the first direct contact finally occurred, it was brief and brutal. Human ships striking from angles that should not have existed, delivering concentrated disruptions rather than raw firepower, then disappearing again. Not to retreat, but to reposition, forcing the alien fleets to spread out, to protect against threats that refused to take shape. On Earth, surface defenses remained quiet, cities still ruins, energy output minimal, presenting the same image of a dying world. And this reinforced the Empire's belief that the real threat was not Earth itself, but its influence, a belief that guided their next move and played directly into humanity's design. Instead of committing to planetary destruction, the alien command activated a system long reserved for extreme cases, a controlled broadcast intended to suppress deviation across multiple refined species at once, a galaxy-scale correction meant to reset behavior and eliminate the spread of choice. Humans had anticipated this, not because they could predict alien decisions perfectly, but because they understood control logic, and control always escalated inward when threatened. When the broadcast began, refined populations across the Empire felt the pressure increase, the familiar calm tightening into something closer to numbness. And for a moment it seemed as though Earth's influence would be erased in silence. Then the human response triggered, embedded deep within alien control networks, planted slowly over years of quiet interference. Human design variations activated, not blocking the broadcast, not fighting it directly, but bending it, introducing inconsistencies that turned a uniform command into a fragmented experience. Some refined beings felt confusion instead of calm. Others felt memories surface unexpectedly, flashes of identity long buried. And while not all reacted the same way, the uniformity of the Empire depended on fractured. The alien command reacted instantly, attempting to isolate affected regions. But the damage was already spreading, not as rebellion, not as coordinated resistance, but as uncertainty. And uncertainty was poison to a system built on absolute obedience. At the same time, human ships changed behavior, shifting from disruption to declaration, transmitting data bursts directly into alien command channels, not demands, not threats, but truth. Images of Earth after the massacre, recordings of refinement processes, decoded logs describing reduction and control, all delivered without commentary, without emotion, forcing the Empire to see itself reflected through human eyes. This was not meant to convince, it was meant to define the conflict, to remove the Empire's ability to pretend its actions were misunderstood. On Earth, surface installations powered up for the first time since the invasion. Not weapons, but transmitters, broadcasting a single message across multiple frequencies, simple, clear, and impossible to misinterpret. Earth was not asking for survival, it was asserting choice. The message did not declare war, did not threaten destruction, it stated a boundary. The humanity would not accept refinement, would not participate in control systems, and would resist any attempt to erase identity, not only for itself, but wherever it found it. This was the moment Earth answered, not with fear or apology, but with definition. The alien fleets paused, not because they were damaged beyond function, but because their command structure was under strain, forced to process a situation their models could not resolve cleanly. Earth was not behaving like a rebellious species, seeking dominance, nor like a broken one seeking mercy. It was acting like a variable that refused to stabilize. In the midst of this hesitation, losses mounted on both sides. Human ships were destroyed, crews lost, and every loss carried weight. Because humanity had learned to value lives without turning them into symbols. Yet even as ships fell, the pattern held, decentralized, adaptive, refusing collapse. Across the galaxy, refined populations continued to experience anomalies, small but persistent, and some began to act on them, not openly, but through subtle disobedience, missed responses, delayed actions, and the Empire found itself spending more resources on internal correction than external suppression. Earth's answer had shifted the battlefield from space to systems, from weapons to behavior, and this shift favored a species that thrived in complexity. As the conflict reached its peak, a final transmission was sent from Earth, not to the NER fleets, not to the Empire's leadership alone, but to anyone listening, refined or free. A simple statement that did not promise rescue or victory, only solidarity. That choice mattered, that memory mattered, and that no species deserved to exist as a tool. When the transmission ended, Earth did not celebrate, because celebration assumed resolution, and resolution had not yet come. But something irreversible had happened. The Empire could no longer treat Earth as a contained problem, and the galaxy could no longer ignore the idea that refinement was not inevitable. Humanity had answered not by becoming what the Empire feared, but by becoming what it was: adaptable, emotional, flawed, and unwilling to surrender identity for safety. The war was not over, and the cost was far from paid. But the moment Earth answered marked a turning point, because from that point forward, every decision the Empire made would be measured against the fact that control had limits, and that somewhere, among the stars, a species had survived massacre, learnt the truth, and chosen defiance not as a shout, but as a steady, unbreakable refusal to be refined. The end did not come with explosions or victory cries, because real endings rarely do. They arrive quietly, shaped by decisions made long before the final moment. And by the time the galaxy realized something had changed forever, the change had already settled into place. After Earth's answer echoed through systems and minds, the alien empire did what it had always done when control slipped. It paused, not to reflect, but to calculate, believing that every problem still had a solution. If enough pressure was applied, fleets remained in motion, commands continued to flow, and refinement broadcasts were adjusted again and again. But the results were no longer predictable, because the galaxy itself was no longer uniform. Earth had not shattered the Empire in one dramatic strike. It had done something far more dangerous. It had introduced choice where obedience once lived, and choice could not be erased without destroying the system that relied on it. Across refined worlds, subtle changes became permanent. Some individuals remembered names, others questioned routines. Some felt anger for the first time in their lives without understanding why, and while many were still bound, the idea that something had been taken from them could not be fully suppressed again. The Empire responded with force in some regions, tightening control, increasing punishment. But every act of correction now carried a cost, because resistance no longer came from one place. It came from everywhere, in small, quiet ways that could not be traced back to Earth alone. On Earth, the survivors did not celebrate this shift, because they understood that influence did not mean safety, and the threat of annihilation still hovered over the planet like a distant storm. Instead, they worked, building systems meant to last, not to dominate, focusing on resilience rather than expansion. Because humanity had learned that becoming an empire was not the same as becoming secure. Children who had grown up under ruins now looked at the stars without innocence but without fear, taught not that the universe was cruel, but that it was indifferent, and that meaning had to be created, defended, and remembered. The council dissolved. Quietly, not because it failed, but because its purpose had been fulfilled, replaced by networks of cooperation that did not rely on singular authority, ensuring that no future enemy could destroy humanity by cutting off its head. Human ships continued to move through space, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as witnesses, carrying data, memory, and proof, helping where they could, retreating when they must, always avoiding the trap of becoming what they had fought. The alien empire did not fall in a single moment, but it began to fracture, slowly, painfully, as control systems strained under the weight of constant correction and increasing deviation. And while some leaders demanded escalation, others began to question whether refinement itself had been the mistake. For the first time in its long history, the empire faced something it could not fully control, a living example that fear did not always lead to obedience, and that destruction did not always lead to silence. Earth became something new in the galaxy, Not a capital, not a symbol carved in stone, but a reference point. A quiet reminder passed in whispers and encoded messages. A place that had been broken and refused to disappear. Humans did not ask the galaxy to follow them. They did not promise freedom or protection, because they understood that every species had to make its own choice. But they made one thing clear, through action rather than words. Refinement was not inevitable. Years passed, then decades, and Earth changed again, not returning to what it was, but becoming something shaped by memory and purpose. Its cities rebuilt smaller and stronger, its technology designed with limits and transparency, its culture grounded in the knowledge that survival without identity was not survival at all. The scars of the massacre were never hidden, never erased, because forgetting was the first step toward obedience, and humanity would never forget again. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a refined worker hesitated before completing an order. A soldier paused before firing. A leader questioned a directive, and in those moments, unseen and unrecorded, Earth's legacy lived. The war did not end with surrender or treaty. It ended with a shift in how the galaxy understood power, not as force alone, but as the ability to choose in the face of fear. When historians of distant worlds eventually tried to define the moment, everything changed. They did not point to a great battle or a fallen capital. They pointed to a planet that survived massacre and said no. Not loudly, not violently, but clearly and consistently. Earth never claimed victory, because victory suggested an end. And this struggle had no final chapter, only responsibility, but one truth endured, written into human memory and echoed quietly among the stars. They had tried to refine humanity, to shape it into something useful and silent, and instead they had revealed what humans truly were, not perfect, not gentle, not invincible, but stubborn, adaptable, and unwilling to surrender the right to choose. In the end, Earth did not rule the galaxy, did not save it, did not destroy it. It simply remained itself, and that was enough to change everything. Because the most dangerous thing in any universe is not a weapon or an empire, it is a species that knows who it is, remembers what it lost, and decides, again and again, that it will never bow, never forget, and never allow its future to be refined. Asterisk if you listen the story till the end, you are a warrior. Like and subscribe my channel.